Alright, this week I'm going to show you how to make a Tarte Alsacienne aux Pommes, an Alsatian apple pie. It is a variation, a custard-based variation of a traditional apple pie. So a little bit different, something that I used to have growing up around Thanksgiving. To start, we're going to make some pie dough. So for pie dough, start with your flour. For this recipe, we're using 6 ounces of flour. I've done some rough conversions into cups. So if you are not measuring, if you do not have a measuring scale to measure a recipe that is listed in ounces, there are some conversions you can do. You do have to keep in mind that the conversions are for fluid ounces and not dry ounces. So about 1 cup is about 8 fluid ounces, and 2 tablespoons is about 1 fluid ounce. So for this recipe we need 6 ounces of flour. It's about 3/4 of a cup of flour. Keeping in mind that these conversions will not be 100% accurate because we are going from using a fluid conversion to get us the measurement of dry ingredients. After that we need 1 ounce of sugar, which comes to around 2 tablespoons of sugar. And you just want to get that mixed in. You can do it with your hand, you can swirl it around the bowl. Either way works. With pie dough, my preferred way of mixing in the butter is by hand, so we're going to be using our hands a lot with this anyway. For the butter, we need 3 ounces of butter. It's about 6 tablespoons. So 6 tablespoons is 3/4 of a stick. It's got tablespoon measurements on the side. They're not always lined up with the actual stick, so keep that in mind when you're cutting those. Now to work the butter into the flour, what I actually prefer to do is I will cube the butter first. Now for the butter, it's okay to have had it out on the counter for a bit, but you don't want it fully room temperature. You don't want it to give way completely when you are holding it, because that's going to change how your pie dough comes out. So there's 2 types of pie dough. There are flaky pie doughs and mealy pie doughs. You will find some recipes that have different quantities of ingredients for each kind. The main difference is the size of butter that is left in the dough. So to start, you get the butter covered in flour, and what I will do is you just start working, pushing the flour and butter together in your hands as you go. So for a flaky pie dough, you want small pieces of butter left so that when you finally make the dough and roll it out, there will be layers of fat between the dough, similar to how flaky pastry doughs are done. If you are making a pie dough for the bottom of a pie, you want a mealy pie dough. A mealy pie dough is one where you've worked the butter in to the point that you have a kind of cornmeal consistency almost to the flour. And what that'll do is that helps the distribution of the fat in the dough, helps resist liquids. So if you're baking in an oven and it's liquidy and it's going to thicken, it can help your pie dough from getting too soggy. So as we're working this is about the consistency that you want for a flaky pie dough, where you can see there's still pieces of butter left in here that if we were to finish the dough and roll it out, that would create, small pockets and layers of fat. However, for this we're doing just the bottom of a pie, so we can go all the way to a mealy stage. And so sometimes you'll get these little pockets that are actually just clumps. They're not actually pieces of fat from the butter. So you can break those up. This is about where we want to be for the flour. Just Clean my hands. And we're going to get the liquid, which in this case is egg yolk and water. Now for this recipe we only need 1 egg yolk. For reference, a single egg is typically about 2 ounces. So if you need 1 ounce, usually if you have a large egg, the yolk will be about 1 ounce and the white will be about 1 ounce. So if you need 1 ounce of egg then you just need to separate it and you'll get 1 ounce. So one way to separate it, if you get a good clean break on the egg, you can open it like this and kind of pass the yolk between the shells. That'll give you a separated egg yolk. There are some tools you can get that you'll kind of dump the egg through and it'll filter it out. For this, there's our 1 egg yolk. We now need 1.5 ounces of water, which is about 3 tablespoons. Now you want cold water. One of the reasons for this is that when you're making pie dough, after you mix the pie dough, typically you'll want to let it rest in the fridge for a couple hours, just to let the fat set up. You're just looking to get this consistency, and then you pour it straight in. And we are looking just to combine the doughs. So instead of using my hands again and getting dirty, I'm going to use this. We're just trying to get it to the point of combining. We don't want to work the flour too much. The more you work the flour, the more gluten you're going to get, and gluten can cause your pie dough to be tough. Now you'll notice this is still pretty wet. That's because when we did our conversion, it's not perfect. What you can do is have a small bit of flour that you kind of work in to get it to a better consistency. You want it to be not tacky. So tacky is if you touch it and it's sticking to your fingers. You want it to be able to be workable on the counter. So at this point, I am going to switch to my hands because I can feel the consistency of the dough. Just going to spread it out, let it touch the flour. And that is pretty good. Probably going to go a little bit more flour. You will flour your surface that you're going to roll this out on eventually, so it's not super critical to get it perfect right here, but this is about where I want it. It's just combined. It's not sticky anymore. It's one solid mass. And this will need to rest in the fridge for a bit, primarily because it's very malleable at this point, and you want to be able to actually roll it out and work it, and you need a little bit of resistance to the dough for that to be effective. So I'll move on to the pie. We have a prefabricated pie shell that we're going to use, and then when the other dough is done, we will make one from scratch. So for this recipe, the traditional recipe has you peel the apples, quarter them, and then cut each quarter into thirds. I have found that it's just as good to use one of these. This is an apple peeler corer. We'll do all the hard work for you and make this take a lot less time. You take your apples, mount them onto the tool, and begin spinning. This will automatically peel and slice and core our apples. Now for this, we want, move this over here so we can see better. We want half circles, what we're doing for our visuals. So what we're going to do, separate out the pieces that still have some skin on them. And you're going to arrange these in a circle in the pie shell. So they're not all uniform size, so you're going to have to finagle a little bit. You'll notice there's a gap in the center. That's fine. That's one of the places we're going to use to test the doneness of the custard as we're baking it. So it's okay that there's a gap there. So what I'm doing now is I'm overlapping. You see where the gaps are on the outside? I am overlapping the apple pieces so that they start to cover those. The custard will will leak into and fill those areas, so you don't have to worry about getting it 100% full of apple. This will take about 3 apples. When I've done it in the past, even with a deep dish pie crust, it's not a full 3 apples. I'm using Honeycrisp apples. You can feel free to use whatever type of apple you prefer. If you use something like a Granny Smith, those are more tart apples. This recipe doesn't have a ton of sugar in it, so if you want to try to get a contrast between sour, more of a tart apple, and the custard, that might work. I haven't actually tried that. But for these I'm using specifically sweet apples. Alright, at this point your pie shell should be relatively filled with apples, and we just need to make the custard. So the custard's pretty simple. It is you start with a 1/4 cup of flour. Flour is going to help thicken the custard. And then you need a 1/2 cup of sugar. And 2 medium eggs. At this point you'll just use a whisk to combine them. And this first part will be relatively thick. You're going to add in some heavy cream to thin it out. You just want to thoroughly incorporate the sugar, flour, and egg. Into a nice mixture. And then you add 7 tablespoons of heavy cream. Now if you're making more than 1 pie, if you're making 2 pies for example, a single pint of heavy cream will do 2 pies. Finish the mixture with the heavy cream. And then just pour it in over the apples. Help it out by kind of pouring over the outside of the apples too. It will eventually fill in, but it's always good to fill in wherever you see it's low. Pop that. And you can see some of these apples are sticking up. That's okay. The custard will rise a little bit. And so this just goes into the oven at 400 degrees for about 20-30 minutes. All right, now that we've given the pie dough some time to rest, you want to roll it out. So first thing, you want to get a little bit of flour onto the surface you're going to be working the dough on. Get it into a nice ball. Place it down. I usually then do a little bit of sprinkle on top just to give it some resistance to sticking. And you want to use a rolling pin to work the dough just slowly in different directions. You want to try to keep it circular so that when you go to put it in your pie shell, it's not a big stretching mess to get it to fit. Now, as you're rolling it out, you may find that it sticks a bit to your surface. This is a bench scraper, something you use to check. Make sure it's not sticking. This one is sticking a little bit. And the other thing I do is once I get about here, I will flour one side and then try and flip it. It is a very, very tender dough though, so you can't manhandle it too much. Flour some more on here and keep going. Pull your pie shell out to get an eyeball on it. Now, I'm not too worried about whether or not I'll have enough dough to go the entire outside. This is a 9.5 pie shell, and so, but one trick to get it in, you fold it in quarters, then it's easier to lift in, place it so it's about centered, and then unfold it into your pie shell. Now you'll notice here mine is not quite large enough to hit the outside because, as I said, this is a 9.5, but that's fine for me. What I'll do is I'm going to trim the edges just so that it's at the surface, and that'll give me a good kind of tart-like shell. If I had a 9-inch pie shell, this would likely fit just fine. All right, same process as before. Move some things out of the way. Don't need the flour anymore. I'll only put the pie shell right there. This is not sticking. It's not sealing as well because I did cover the surface in flour. So you may have to clean the surface a little. At least where you're going to stick the suction area so that it will actually stay in place. And because this one's a 9.5 pie shell, it's going to take a lot more apples to fill. I think I'm going to do one final apple. Now this one, because the pie is so much larger, you may want to actually fill out the center with some more apples, just so that it is not going to take up as much of the custard to fill the center. Because it's larger, I had to make a larger batch of custard for this. I just did a 1.5 times to get it filled out. Now I pull this out, you do this in the oven normally, but for checking for doneness, the easiest way to do it is with a toothpick. So if you insert the toothpick in, and it comes out with any filling on it, it's not done, right? If that's the case, usually you can tell as if you move it around and it still jiggles a little bit. If that's the case, add 10 minutes to your timer, but make sure to check it every 5. You don't want the crust to brown too quickly. It should finish within 10 minutes. And here we have the 2 finished pies. The 9-inch cuts pretty well into 8 pieces. The 9.5 probably could cut into a few more. The pie is well chilled or warm, so if you need to and need to save space, you can put it in the fridge and pull it out when you need to cut it for dessert.